The last day of death row inmate Demetrius Frazier. His chilling confession. Hello friends, and welcome back to Deathwatch Diaries. Tonight we bring you a case that stretches back more than 3 decades, but is finally reaching its grim conclusion. On February 6th, the state of Alabama is scheduled to carry out the execution of 50-year-old Demetrius Frazier, a man whose crimes spanned 2 states and left behind shattered families. Frazier was only 19 when he broke into the Birmingham apartment of Pauline Brown in 1991, a crime that still haunts her loved ones today. Just months later, while back in Michigan, he would strike again, leaving another young life lost. What makes this case so disturbing is not only the brutality of the crimes, but also Frazier's unexpected confession that ultimately brought Alabama prosecutors into the picture and set him on the path to death row. Stay with us as we uncover his final chapter, and don't forget to subscribe for more prison documentary stories. Demetrius Frazier was born and raised in Michigan, a state that has not used the death penalty since the 19th century. By the time he was a teenager, his life was already spiraling in the wrong direction. Those who knew him described him as restless and quick to anger, a young man who gravitated toward crime instead of stability. He had a history of trouble, bouncing between poor choices and dangerous influences. And it all came to a breaking point in 1991 when he traveled south to Alabama. At just 19 years old, Frazier made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. On the morning of November 26, 1991, just 2 days before Thanksgiving, he broke into the Birmingham apartment of 40-year-old Pauline Brown. Pauline was a devoted mother of 2 daughters, a hard-working woman who had spent 20 years in her job at Bama Foods, and someone who was deeply loved by her family and community. According to Frazier's own later confession, he spotted a light on inside Pauline's ground-floor apartment at the Fountain Heights complex. Acting on impulse, he removed a screen and climbed through a window. Inside, he searched one of the bedrooms and found a small amount of cash, but as he moved deeper into the apartment, he entered the bedroom where Pauline was sleeping. He pointed a pistol at her and woke her up. Terrified, Pauline complied with his demand for money, handing him about $80 from her purse. But the nightmare didn't end there. Frazier forced her into further humiliation, and as she begged for her life, repeating the words, "Please don't kill me," he grew irritated. Instead of showing mercy, he pressed the gun to her head and pulled the trigger. Pauline's life ended instantly. Afterward, Frazier did something chillingly casual. He left the apartment for a short time, hid across the street to see if anyone had noticed, then returned to rummage through the home again. He even went into the kitchen, where he ate 2 bananas before fleeing. It was a shocking lack of remorse, a display of indifference to the life he had just taken. Later that morning, Pauline's co-workers grew worried when she didn't show up for her shift. Friends and a maintenance man entered her apartment and discovered her body, beginning an investigation that would haunt Birmingham for years to come. 4 months later, in March of 1992, Demetrius Frazier was back in Detroit, Michigan, and once again he struck. This time, his victim was 14-year-old Crystal Kendrick, a young girl who had been reported as a runaway. Crystal's life had already been difficult, and she had been staying in abandoned buildings. On March 8th, Frazier lured her into one of those abandoned structures. What happened inside was brutal. Reports indicate that he attempted to force himself on Crystal, but she resisted. Angered by her defiance, Frazier shot her, ending her life in another act of senseless violence. Authorities quickly tied him to the crime, and in Michigan, he was sentenced to life in prison. But since Michigan does not have the death penalty, it was assumed that this would be the maximum punishment he would ever face. For a time, it seemed as though that would be the end of his story. But during questioning about the Michigan case, Frazier revealed something that stunned investigators. He admitted to killing a woman in Alabama just months earlier. That woman was Pauline Brown. Alabama detectives were flown to Michigan, where they interviewed him and obtained a full confession. He gave detailed accounts of how he broke into her apartment, stole money, assaulted her, and eventually killed her when her pleas became too much for him to bear. It was not only a confession, but a chilling portrait of a man who felt no remorse at the time. This confession set the wheels in motion for Alabama prosecutors to take custody of him. In 1996, after being extradited, he stood trial in Alabama for Pauline Brown's murder. The courtroom testimony revealed not only the details of the crime, but also the heartbreaking impact it left behind. Pauline Brown was remembered as a loving daughter, a mother of two, and a woman whose family was preparing for Thanksgiving at the very moment she was killed. The prosecutor described her as someone in the prime of her life, whose future as a grandmother had just begun. One of her daughters had recently had a baby, and Pauline never got to hold her first grandchild. The jury found Frazier guilty of capital murder, and he was sentenced to death. His appeals stretched on for decades, with legal challenges ranging from procedural issues to questions about his mental state. Yet through it all, the conviction and sentence stood. For nearly 2 decades, Frazier was held in Michigan to serve his life sentence for Crystal Kendrick's death. It wasn't until 2011 that he was transferred to Alabama's Holman Correctional Facility, where he was placed on death row. There, his life was a stark contrast to the freedom he once knew. Reports suggest he kept mostly to himself, often described as quiet. But beneath that calm exterior was a man awaiting the ultimate punishment. As his execution date drew near, the memories of his crimes returned to the spotlight. Both the family of Pauline Brown and those who remembered Crystal Kendrick were forced to relive the pain that he had caused. For them, decades had passed, but the loss remained just as sharp. On February 6, 2025, if nothing changes, Demetrius Frazier will face execution at Holman Correctional Facility. Like others before him, his final hours will likely include a last meal, a visit from his spiritual advisor, and the chance to speak final words. For Pauline Brown's family, this date represents a moment of closure long delayed. Her mother, Augusta, her daughters, and her extended family endured over 3 decades of hearings, appeals, and legal proceedings. Each year that passed was another reminder of the empty seat at their table, another Thanksgiving without Pauline. For the community of Detroit, the name of Crystal Kendrick is also remembered. She was only 14, a girl with her whole life ahead of her, whose story became forever tied to Frazier's violent spree. Dear friends, as the clock runs down to February 6th, the story of Demetrius Frazier comes full circle. For more than 30 years, his name has been tied to pain in both Alabama and Michigan. And now the state of Alabama prepares to close this chapter with his scheduled execution. Yet beyond the headlines and court files are the lives forever altered Pauline Brown, a hardworking mother taken just days before Thanksgiving, and young Crystal Kendrick, whose short life ended in an abandoned Detroit building. Their families have lived with empty spaces at the table for decades, waiting for justice that seemed to move slowly. Whether one views this execution as justice served or a tragic reminder of wasted potential, it stands as a lesson about how quickly violence can destroy not only a victim's future, but entire families. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe for more prison documentary stories.